Thank you very much, Commissioner. I'll draw this debate to a close now, and the vote will occur today. We can move on to the next item on our agenda, Iran, in particular the case of Nasrin Sotoudeh, the 2012 Sakharov Prize laureate. I'll give the floor to the authors of the resolution. We'll hear from Dominique Bilder. You have 1 minute.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam. The case of Nasrin Sotoudeh underscores the precarious nature of women's situation in all countries where Sharia is observed. The scandal of this lawyer, condemned to 38 years imprisonment, is not specific to Iran. We see this week the Saudi Arabia feminist Autul, after 2 years of poor treatment and humiliation in court this week. Still, the Saudi Arabia had the virtual summit of the G20, a showcase for European powers. The only merit of today's debate is to recall in what a poor situation we are in with the violation of women's freedoms. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo, pani poseł. Głos zabierze pan poseł Nikolaj.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Mr. Nikolaj Willumsen. 1 minute.
I dag sender vi et klart budskab fra.
Today, we are sending a clear message from the European Parliament. We are calling for an end to repression in Iran. The Iranian regime is theological, and it represses the Iranian population. It has sent thousands of political opponents to jail, extrajudicially. This is absolutely unacceptable. We're also sending a message of solidarity to the population in Iran. The people there are so courageous. They are standing up to the oppression, and they continue their fight for democracy and justice. The Iranian women also deserve our support when they try very much to fight the mullah and to try to be able to make decisions for their own bodies. Let us call for the liberation of Nasrin Sotoudeh as well as all political prisoners, and make sure that those who are responsible are held responsible.
Pani poseł Hanna Neumann.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear from Mrs. Hannah Neumann for 2 minutes.
Dear colleagues, Nasrin Sotoudeh is a human rights lawyer. This means that she uses the laws of her country, Iran, to defend her clients, the people of Iran, against a regime that does not feel bound by any of these laws. And the more Nasrin uses these laws, the more absurd become the charges of this regime. The latest one, 33 years, 148 lashes for defending women that took off their hijab. Nasrin is now since 10 years in and out of prison in one of the countries with the cruelest prison conditions amidst the ravaging COVID pandemic. Nasrin Sotoudeh really pays a high price for her love of the law and of the people of Iran, and I'm full of admiration for this unbreakable woman, and I think she rightfully deserved the Sakharov Prize of this parliament. And as you all know, Nasrin is not the only one. The regime's repression got a lot crueler recently with arrests and executions. Borrell was executed last week. Mr Djalali is threatened with execution, and no justice has been done for the thousands of protesters in the streets of Iran last year. And that's why I think it's so important that we send 2 clear signals today. One signal to the regime, that if they continue like this, they will be even more isolated and subject to targeted sanctions. And one signal to the brave Iranians, the vibrant and diverse civil society. You have our full solidarity, our full attention, our full support, as long as this will be needed. Because just like Nasrin, I hope that one day all the prisons of Iran will be turned into museums and parks. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo. Głos zabierze pani poseł Jutta Guteland. Czas wystąpienia.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is our colleague Jutta Guteland. 1 minute.
Fru ordförande.
Madam Commissioner, the situation with human rights in Iran is very serious indeed. The Sakharov Prize laureate Nasrin Sotoudeh, a human rights lawyer defending women and children and journalists, this courageous woman who has dedicated her professional life for 15 years to helping people, and now she's in prison. And she needs our voice, our voices. We need to show that we're on her side and that we're demanding immediate release. We want Iran to stop these attacks against Iranians with dual citizenship. We see environmentalists, journalists, human rights activists in prison. Dr. Ahmadreza Djalali, his family, for example, is faced with the death sentence. We demand his release and we would like the Commission to support his case. Thank you.
Bardzo pani poseł. Głos zabierze pani poseł.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear from our colleague Hilde Vautmans. 1 minute, please.
Dear Commissioner, dear colleagues, ever since I heard the horrible news that the execution of Djalali was a matter of hours or days, I have thought, what more can I do? I wrote letters, I spoke to the ambassador, but nevertheless, now we finally have this resolution. And colleagues, it sends a strong message to Iran. We have an EU Magnitsky Act, and we will use it if Djalali is not freed. I'd like to convey a message from Djalali's wife, with whom I spoke yesterday. She says, Ahmadreza is nothing but an innocent scientist and father of 2 children. He worked to improve the life of others through his research. If he's executed, nothing can bring him back. So please, put all your efforts in and make sure he's freed before it's too late. Colleague, let us vote a strong resolution and make sure it's not too late. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo pani poseł. Głos zabierze.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll now hear from Charlie Weimers. 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Swedish citizen Ahmadreza Djalali faces imminent execution in the Islamic Republic of Iran for refusing to spy on European institutions on behalf of the mullahs. On behalf of conservatives, I demanded sanctions against Iranian authorities. I thank the lead negotiator, MEP Lega, for his leadership. Swedes should note that a new conservative government in Sweden would bring hope for a less appeasing foreign policy. That shift is desperately needed. As my other Swedish colleague, MEP Guteland, exerted her and the Social Democrats' influence to water down the text. MEP Guteland, I want you one day, as me, clearly say that I support the aspirations of the Iranian people who want to live in a free, stable, inclusive, and democratic country. Please say it out loud. The Iranian people needs it. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie pośle. Głos zabierze pani poseł Isabel Wis.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll now hear from Mrs. Isabel Vislalima, 3 minutes.
Nasrin Sotoudeh est de retour.
Nasrin Sotoudeh is back in prison. What was her crime? She defended, as a lawyer, the rights of women, children, religious minorities, artists, journalists, and she did that before the Iranian courts. Iranian authorities sentenced her to 33 years and also for lashes. We in the European Parliament gave her the Sakharov Prize in 2012 for her efforts, and we must support her just as she supported those that came before her, and she did that and paid the price of her freedom. We will continue to support her for as long as we must and until she is freed by the Iranian authorities. Ms. Sotoudeh has always worked to make sure that the death penalty would be abolished and not used. And just a few days ago, the journalist Ram was executed by hanging. The Supreme Court had made a ruling that condemned him to death based on very tenuous evidence. Was kidnapped in the Iraqi territory and brought back to Iran. This is a flagrant violation of human rights and international law. And then, of course, there's Ahmed Reza Jalali, who is a professor in Brussels and in Italy, and who has received death threats and was accused of being a spy. His confession was received following torture. We are calling for urgent action by the European Union with the Iranian authorities to free Ahmed Reza Jalali as soon as possible. Too many people have been put in prison. One has been executed and one on death row. Now, in our resolution, we are calling to draw the attention to the Iranian authorities to put an end to these actions against those who have just expressed their opinions or supported an individual who did not want to be a part of a forced mold. We are calling for an end to the violation of human rights, arbitrary detention based on peaceful demonstrations. Those who defend human rights were asking for a respect for the rights of prisoners, the right to choose an attorney, and we're asking for the International Convention on Political Rights, the ICCPR. Iran is a signatory. Iran must respect the dignity of all individuals. This is the same right that applies to all men and women. The European Union must do all possible to make sure that it uses the means it has to convince the Iranian authorities to change their practices. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, on behalf of the EPP group, Sean Kelly, 2 minutes.
Uachtaráin Commissioner Rish Díomh. In October, the High Commissioner asked us to take a holistic approach to Iran. This was particularly so in relation to preserving the nuclear agreement, which I agree with, and which was also, of course, a triumph for European diplomacy. The other side of the coin is the human rights record in Iran, which is not pretty, and particularly the case of the 2012 Sakharov Prize winner, Nasrin Sotoudeh. We have a duty to follow all laureates of this prize and to speak out when they are being persecuted. We did this in the case of Nasrin in 2018, and it is deeply regrettable that we must return to renew our call on the Iranian authorities to release her from her arbitrary detention. Today we call for the unconditional release of Nasrin Sotoudeh with a renewed urgency. The people of Iran are struggling to battle the COVID-19 pandemic. Prisoners, not just in Iran, but around the world, are at an increased risk of infection. Nasrin unfortunately contracted the virus recently. While she was granted temporary release, she was ordered to return to prison again against the advice of medical experts. Shameful, because this has the potential to be a fatal decision. I'm also dismayed by the continuously high use of capital punishment in Iran. This is not acceptable under any circumstances. Certainly a journalist should not be executed for expressing their views. A lawyer should not be tortured and imprisoned for peacefully working to preserve human rights. I call on Iran to call a halt to this practice immediately. While we focus on the case of Nasrin, we must also think of all the other peaceful campaigners and activists, some of whom worked with her, who are facing a similar plight in Iran.
I hope that we will succeed in freeing her and in others like her and having them back in their homes before Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Our next speaker will be for the SND group, Mrs. Maria Arena. 1 minute.
Merci.
Thank you. Well, yesterday we were celebrating the Sakharov Prize and the movement for democracy in Belarus. Nasrin Sotoudeh is our Sakharov Prize laureate from 2012, and since then she's been in prison. Nasrin Sotoudeh, I took a photo. I can't show it to you, but she's a smiley, happy woman, a strong woman. During the 2 weeks that the Islamic Republic of Iran granted her, we were happy enough to have her in the Legal Affairs Committee in this Parliament. She's still a strong woman, a happy, a joyful woman, but she's weakened by the imprisonment that she's suffering. As has been said, she defended the rights of women, human rights, the right to justice in her country. We demand that any dialogue with Iran have the prerequisite attached to it that Nasrin be freed, and I'm thinking about her family. Thank you very much. And now Ms. Frederique Ries, 1 minute.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, Madam Commissioner, 2020 is a very strange year which is coming to an end, and almost everything has changed, of course. But in Tehran, it's business as usual. Oppression, execution. This resolution in relation to Nasrin Sotoudeh is something we've been working on for the past week. Now, controversial selfies, having Instagram can make sure that you're imprisoned, and the mullahs have executed Roland Zam, a quick-fire case. His crime being that he uncovered corruption. So it's business as usual in Tehran, and it should have consequences for our dealings with them. And the Europe-Iran Economic Forum has been cancelled. That is what we need to do. We need to make sure that we hit those responsible and have a targeted approach with our sanctions. It's not too late to release Nasrin Sotoudeh. It's not too late for Dr. Djalali, who's waiting for execution in prison. 2020 is coming to an end. We need change now.
Dziękuję bardzo, pani poseł. W imieniu grupy
Thank you very much. And now for the ID group, Mr. Marco Campomenosi, 2 minutes.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Commissioner. The text that we are discussing today is one that can be shared by all, no doubt. It's not the first time that we found ourselves to draft and to vote on a resolution against the bloody regime or bloody regimes or those who repress journalists, lawyers, women and men who fight for freedom. And so the question that I'm asking myself, and I'm asking you now too, is if we would have been as brave as these men and women. I come from a family that fought fascism. And I can relate then to those who fight and who have fought for their freedom. Today, it's true that topical issues come and go so quickly. We made the decision to discuss this case of Nasrin Sotoudeh, and we hope that she will be freed in quick order. But of course, we have the issue of Rumallah Zam, a journalist who was killed, and Mr Djalali, who is waiting for his death sentence that we hope will not take place. The case of Nasrin Sotoudeh does remind us much of other cases. The woman who was arrested in Turkey just a few weeks ago, Farida Aldeka. These are women and men who are overwhelmingly courage that many of us do not have. And I think it's good to remember this so that we don't just look at a debate and a resolution and that they become useless. Yesterday, we had the chance to discuss this with the High Representative, just a few weeks back, about what we should do with the JCPOA and the relations with the U.S. I don't really believe that the relations are going to change between the U.S. and Iran and the opposition that lies there. And we won't be effective in fighting the regime if we're not honest with ourselves about this. In fact, we might fail in that endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now for the Conservatism and Reformists, Mr Terch, 1 minute.
Muchas gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, today we're discussing Nasrin Sotoudeh, Sakharov laureate in 2012, who is being held in prison in her home country. And of course, the conduct of the regime as well that is torturing Iranians, promoting terrorism and stating that it would like to exterminate the Jewish people like Hitler, and that is promoting its nuclear program, threatening peace around the world. And then we have these democracies in Spain, and we can see that the Spanish government is financing the similar actions in Latin America and regimes that assassinate people. 1,500 people were killed in the streets, and 2 weeks after the fact, Mr Borrell came there to Tehran and went for business for Europe. And there's even been calls for lifting of the embargo and going to Iran to open up new businesses and criticizing Trump for maintaining the embargo against this regime in Iran. So I think that what is right is the exact opposite of what we are saying. We need to speak with strength against the Iranian regime so that it will stop doing what it is doing.
Dziękuję w imieniu Grupy Zjednoczonej Lewicy Europejskiej.
Thank you. And now for GUE, Mick Wallace, 1 minute.
Thanks, President. These urgencies are the epitome of what you like to call disinformation. In the US and NATO-funded reports that are the basis for the Uyghur resolution, there's not one named person interviewed who says that there's forced labour in Xinjiang. Not to mention the completely fraudulent report by the American National Endowment for Democracy-funded Chinese human rights defenders, which claimed there was 1 million Uyghurs in detention. It's just a weapon against China. Same with Iran. This is the 4th human rights-centred attack on Iran in just over a year. I'll take these things seriously when we stop doing them selectively. Where are the 4 resolutions addressing the European and US-supported genocide in Yemen? America is separating children from their mothers and keeping them in cages by the thousands, and has over 2 million, mostly coloured, in prison and carrying out forced labour. France is passing anti-Muslim legislation and still behaving like a colonist in the Sahel, while Israel shoots children in Palestine. But that's all okay. When we stop weaponizing human rights in this place, we might have a bit more credibility. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję, panie pośle. Głos zabierze.
Thank you. Mr Sikorski, for 2 minutes.
Madam President, Iran claims to be an Islamic republic. But as this resolution makes clear, it is also one of the world's most repressive regimes. I therefore have a question to the mullahs in Tehran. If you represent a God that is good, powerful, and merciful, then why do you need to repress, torture, and murder your people so much? No, your regime is a blasphemy and an abomination to every decent Muslim, every person of faith, and every person of conscience. You have brought your country to such desperate straits that you are now signing agreements with China to give away your energy sector and to give away your critical infrastructure. They will not complain about your human rights abuses, but I'm not sure Allah will be pleased that you are becoming vassals to a godless communist regime. However, if you want better relations and the easing of sanctions with us, stop this repression now. This is inhuman what you're doing to your own people. And one last thing. I have a request to the diplomats from our nation states and from our European External Action Service. Next time you meet with Mr Zarif, who is a smiling Ribbentrop, just remember what kind of nasty regime he represents. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję, panie pośle. Głos zabierze pani poseł.
Thank you very much. And now, Miss Evin Incir, 1 minute.
Dear friends, human rights is the radical notion that all people are born equal and that we will never compromise on neither civil rights nor social rights. It is radical because we still see oppression in way too many countries. Yes, it is a paradox because on one hand, humanity is able to fly to the moon and back, but at the same time, some people still are not able to know how to respect all people's freedom and dignity. One of the current worst oppressing regime is the Iranian one, but we will never be silent. Mr Djalali and Nasrin Sotoudeh and other human rights defenders struggle for human rights, democracy and the rule of law will be continuing being the center of everything we do. To the Iranian regime, but my message is very clear. We will continue to be vocal. We will continue to demand the release of all prisoners of conscience, abolishment of death penalty, and the time for end of impunity will also come in your case. If history has taught us something, it is that dictators and oppressing regimes always falls, but the people always prevails. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo. Głos zabierze pan poseł.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Austrovicius, 1 minute.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, colleagues, it is already the third resolution of this Parliament addressing the gross human rights violations in Iran. There is no change or improvement in the situation. The mullahs regime continues the fight against its own society and remains the main threat to the Iranian people. Today we mourn Iranian journalist Ruhollah Zam, who was executed on Saturday. We worry that the Iranian-Swedish academic Mr Djalali might be the next, and express concerns over deteriorating health of imprisoned Sakharov Prize laureate Nasrin Sotoudeh. We deplore the oppressive actions of the Iranian regime, which is nothing more but weak in its incapacity to face critical political competition and embrace differences in opinion and people. We have to insist on full and impartial UN-led investigation of 1988 massacre of thousands of political prisoners in Iran and secure accountability by prosecuting perpetrators. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję, panie pośle. Głos zabierze pani poseł.
Thank you very much. And now Ms. Bonfrisco, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. My words today are dedicated to Mrs. Nasrin Sotoudeh, the Ayatollahs who are in charge of the Islamic Republic of Iran, are desecrating Islam itself. They say that they do everything in the name of their compassionate God, but their cruelty and daily destabilizing actions are sought to bring pressure about. They don't like human dignity and diversity, and as the European Union we need to say that we were naive and a bit short-sighted and thinking that the P5+1 agreement could be restricted to nuclear issues only. Freedom of thought and human rights should be part of it too. We think it's insane to rule a country using religion, and if human dignity is not part of your approach as a government, then it is murderous, and we need to act against murderers and stand with the people of Israel as well.
Pani poseł, głos zabierze pan poseł Adam Bielan.
Thank you, madam. Mr. Bielan, for 1 minute.
Dziękuję bardzo, pani przewodnicząca. Fundamental rights such as freedom of expression and assembly must always be respected. I strongly condemn the steadily deteriorating human rights situation in Iran, including for persons belonging to ethnic and religious minorities suffering from systematic political and social discrimination. We deplore Iran's abuse of the criminal justice system to repress peaceful activities that promote and defend human rights. I call on the Iranian authorities to live up to their international obligations. In this context, I welcome the adoption of the Magnitsky Act by the Council as an important EU instrument to sanction violators of human rights. While maintaining the joint comprehensive plan of action and EU-Iran high-level political dialogue, the EU and especially the High Representative should continue raising human rights concerns with the Iranian authorities in bilateral and multilateral fora. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję. Głos zabierze pani.
Thank you very much. And now Ms. Juliana Zovko, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Commissioner. Yesterday, we gave a Sakharov Prize to a woman and to all these women who are opposing authoritarian regime. I grew up in a communist regime and remember when I had the first time a right to vote. And now I'm standing here in the parliament as a woman, as a member of the parliament, looking at you as a commissioner woman and the chairing who is a woman, and all these women who are fighting for freedom of somebody who still we don't know whether she's alive or dead, and she's ill, and she was our Sakharov Prize winner in 2012, and we are still negotiating and we are still talking to the regime that is holding this woman scared, alone, forgotten by all of us. And I feel ashamed. I feel ashamed as a woman. I feel ashamed as somebody who is looking at all of you, divided by the ideologies. Who are we going to judge and condemn? Which regime and who are we going to talk to? There's no negotiations with the people who are holding women in prison. As women, they have a courage to defend. They have a courage to defend and to defend all those who are oppressing people, who are oppressing minorities, who are oppressing all those who have a different beliefs than their beliefs. And please, let us fight for this woman. Let us fight for this man who is waiting for his death sentence. And let's use our instruments. Maybe we don't have weapons, but we have a new act that put sanctions on all these regimes, and let's use them in a proper way, without discrimination, without division, and let's use them, and let's make everybody not to lose hope. Thank you.
Pani poseł, głos zabierze pani przewodnicząca Nicola.
Thank you. Ms. Bear, now 1 minute.
Wie viele Menschen noch müssen ihr Leben verlieren?
How many more people need to lose their lives? That's what I thought when I heard about the execution of some. And of course, the mullah's only answer to criticism from people is brutal violence. And Josep Borrell and the member states were right in cancelling their participation in the Iran-EU forum. And the EEAS has not made it clear that they were talking about political prisoners and that our human rights are being flouted. Mr. Borrell and member states need to make sure that no more political prisoners are executed. When there is a next exchange with Iran, we need to make it clear that they are violating human rights. We need to talk to the democratic opposition, and Nasrin Sotoudeh and the other women in her position need to be borne in mind when dealing with them. If we want a future for the Middle East and a balance of powers, we need a democratic Iran that defends human rights and democracy. So next year I hope that the Iranian opposition can be suggested as a candidate for the Sakharov Prize.
Bardzo dziękuję. Głos zabierze pani poseł.
Thank you. Ms. Jana Gancha, 1 minute.
Madam President, dear Commissioner, dear colleagues, Nasrin Sotoudeh, Mr Djalali, their names are like an exhortation for us, Europeans. Their lives hang on a thread, and every single day could be their last, much like it could be for thousands of political opponents and members of public opinion that are currently being held in Iranian prisons. We must give voices to those who are no longer with us. 30,000 political prisoners who were massacred in 1988, 1,500 protesters who were assassinated in November 2019. We cannot stand idly by. The Ayatollah's regime continues to thwart the 77 UN resolutions on human rights in the country. This is unacceptable. Tehran continues to deny reality, disregarding its commitments and international treaties, and not just in the area of human rights. The European Union must look beyond sanctions, using all diplomatic means, such that an international committee on investigation looks into the 1988 mass executions, and they put an end to this incredible terrorism. Thank you.
Bardzo proszę o zabranie głosu przez pana posła Patryka.
Thank you. Patrick Jaki, 1 minute.
Dziękuję bardzo pani przewodnicząca. Wysoki Parlamencie. Po pierwsze, to bardzo dobry zwyczaj, że monitorujemy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. I think it is good for us to have this habit of keeping tabs on how people who've won the Sakharov Prize fare afterwards. The same goes for the prize winners this year in Belarus, and hopefully there can be a change in regime that doesn't take as long as in other countries. Now in Iran, the regime is going further and further in cracking down on dissent, and we need to make sure that there is freedom of expression. We also had the news of the execution of the journalist fighting for the freedom of thought and expression, and that news is absolutely disgusting, which has shocked all of us profoundly. And I think we need to do our utmost to bring pressure to bear on the regime and to defend our values, and Nasrin Sotoudeh should be released immediately. That is our task.
Thank you. Karin Karlsbro, 1 minute. Our citizen, Mr Djalali, researched medicine and has been in prison and was in prison from 2016. He rang his wife here in Sweden and said that it was probably going to be their last conversation. Mr Djalali is one of many victims of political repression in Iran. With this resolution, we wish to express our opposition to the regime's attacks against women and men, researchers, journalists, the innocent people in prison must be released. Capital punishment must be abolished, and Mr Djalali must be allowed to come back to his wife and children, to his home. Thank you. And now for the Commission, Commissioner Dalli.
Thank you, Madam President. Nasrin Sotoudeh has been recently returned to prison and is facing clear health difficulties. Once again, we ask that she be released and reunited with her family. The European Union is closely following human rights developments in Iran, and we are acutely aware of the deterioration that has occurred during the past year. Iran's recent execution of dissident Ruhollah Zam last Saturday is, of course, deeply worrying. As noted in this statement, which the HRVP spokesperson issued, the European Union condemns this act in the strongest terms and recalls once again its irrevocable opposition to the use of capital punishment under any circumstances. Iran continues to execute more than 200 individuals every year. We believe that it is imperative for the Iranian authorities to uphold the due process rights of accused individuals and to cease the practice of using televised confessions to establish and promote their guilt. All individuals found to have been involved in serious human rights violations, including during the response to the November 2019 protests in Iran, should be held accountable. While we recognize that Iran continues to host hundreds of thousands of refugees, the human rights situation in Iran remains deeply concerning. The authorities' repression of peaceful protests and other gatherings continues unabated. Such repression, the restriction of fundamental freedoms or the discrimination against religious and ethnic minorities are features of life for too many Iranian citizens. And Iran continues to hold a number of EU-Iranian dual nationals on doubtful grounds, following trials where the due process rights of the accused were not respected in full. This includes Ahmed Reza Jalali, whose situation many members of this House are following, who remains at risk of imminent execution and whose life we request to be spared. We regularly engage with the authorities to urge improvements in the human rights situation in Iran as part of our comprehensive policy towards Iran. This includes asking that the repression of human rights lawyers and defenders, peaceful protesters, ethnic and religious minorities cease, and that individuals detained as a result of their advocacy for universally recognized human rights be freed. Iran should uphold its domestic and international rights commitments, including the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, which it is party to. We have been vocal regarding this demand, including in international fora, such as the United Nations Human Rights Council, and through public statements whenever this has been justified. As the EU, we will continue to call for the release of all arbitrarily detained EU-Iranian dual nationals and Iranian human rights defenders. We also call on Iran to ensure that no individual is detained arbitrarily, that those who are detained are not subject to any form of mistreatment. All detained individuals should also have timely access to a lawyer of their own and to adequate medical care. This is particularly relevant to the cases of the 8 environmentalists who have been detained since January 2018. One of these individuals, Morad Tabaz, continues to experience severe health problems. We are encouraged by the attention paid to these issues by individual members of the European Parliament, and we will continue with our efforts to work together with you in order to promote access to fundamental human rights in Iran and across the world. I thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję pani komisarz. Zamykam debatę.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.